Okay, with morphology, scope, and nature. Morphology is commonly defined as the scientific study of the internal structure of words. Andrew Spencer and Arnold Zwicky view morphology as the conceptual center of linguistics, since words, the object of study of morphology, are at the interface between phonology, syntax, and semantics. Words have phonological properties. Their form often reflects their syntactic function, and their parts are often composed of meaningful smaller pieces. The German poet, novelist, and playwright and philosopher Johann Wolfgang von Goethe from 1749 till 1732 lived. He coined the term morphology in the 19th century in a biological context. This word is of Greek origin. The term morph means form, and morphology means the study of forms.
Yeah, in linguistics, morphology refers to the mental system that is involved in the word formation, or to the branch of linguistics that deals with words, their internal structure, and how they are formed. Morphology had not evolved as a separate subdiscipline until the 19th century. Under the influence of Darwinian theory of evolution, the philologist Max Muller in 1899 claimed that a study of the evolution of words might contribute to the study of evolution of language. However, such evolutionary studies in morphology were abandoned very soon, and since then morphology is regarded as a synchronic discipline. Morphology and phonology were the major concern of American structural linguistics.
Many prominent structuralists were focused on the issues in the theory of word structure. This was fueled by the publication of Eugene Nida's book entitled Morphology in 1949. Traditional linguistics treated words as the basic unit of grammatical theory. American structuralists came up with the concept of morpheme and claimed that words are analyzable in terms of morphemes. This proposal heavily contributed to the further developments in the discipline. The central concern of generative linguistics is to identify the nature of linguistic knowledge and to analyze how it is acquired by children. The place of morphology and phonology in structural linguistics were replaced by syntax and phonology in generative tradition. Morphology was dealt only as a part of the syntactic or phonological analysis. Morphology did not re-emerge until the mid-1970s.
Yeah. However, some linguists like Robbins in 1959 and Matthews in 1972 did some work in morphology. The publication of Mark Aronoff's and Dorothy Siegel's dissertations in 1974 gave the linguists of this kind a radical tool to approach the subject with. Siegel introduced the theory of level ordering in the above-mentioned work. She claimed that the English affixes which never affected stress, are attached to the root only after the stress rules have applied. Under this assumption, affixes were divided into two: class 1 affix like it, which do affect the stress and are attached before the application of stress rules, and class 2 affixes like ness, which do not have an effect on the stress.
Yes, they do not have an effect on the stress and are applied after the application of the stress rules. A generalization that the class 1 affixes appear nearer to the root than class 2 followed from this proposal. Concept of morpheme, morph, allomorph, word lexemes, and word forms now. So morphemes are the smallest indivisible unit of semantic content and grammatical function.
Morphemes are not identical to a word. A single word can have one or more morphemes. Morphemes may or may not stand alone, whereas words can stand alone. A morpheme can be defined as a minimal unit having more or less constant meaning and more or less constant form. For example, the word buyers is made up of three morphemes: by, and s. In the formation of multi-morphemic words, in the formation of multi-morphemic words, that is, words that have more than one morpheme, it is not the case that the morphemes combine in arbitrary ways, but they follow a definite pattern.
Linguists study the meaning of the morphemes as well as their distribution and combinatory possibilities. A single morpheme can be found in a number of different combinations. The more combinations a morpheme is found in, the more productive it is said to be. Morphemes are generally identified based on the following three criteria. Morphemes are words or parts of words that have meaning. They cannot be divided into smaller, meaningful parts without violation of its meaning or without meaningless remainders, and they recur in different word environments with a relatively stable meaning. Morphemes can have varying size. One cannot judge whether something is a morpheme or not by relying only on the number of syllables or the length of the word.
Yeah, correct. For example, constituent, a long word, and the plural marker s qualify as a morpheme. Now, types of morphemes. Morpheme can immediately be divided into two: free morphemes and bound morphemes. Free morphemes are those that can stand alone as words, for example, cat, boat, on, in, about, and so on. Now, bound morphemes are those that can occur only in combination, that is, they are parts of a word. For example, s, ing, meant. Bound morphemes are classified into affixes, clitics, portmanteau morphemes, and empty morphemes. Now tell me about these bound morphemes.
Well, affixes are bound morphemes attached to a word. They suggest where exactly are they attached to in a word. Affixes participate in the word formation of a language. They are always bound morphemes and do not belong to a lexical category. Based on the place of occurrence, affixes are classified into four types. Prefix. The prefix they are attached at the onset always. Restart, unhappy, preview. Suffixes are attached after the root. Quickly, exam, in, dancer, writing. Infixes they are placed within the root itself, like ater, wiser.
Yeah, correct. So, ater is an example from Tagalog language that has an infix, After infix, you have circumfix. So if a prefix and a suffix act together to realize one morpheme and they do not occur separately, it is like a discontinuous morpheme that occurs at the beginning and the end of the root. The Malay word ke adil an, where adil means fair and ke adilan means fairness. Now, another classification of affixes includes derivational and inflectional affix. So tell me about the derivational and the inflectional affix.
So about the derivational affix. Derivational affixes are those bound morphemes that are added to one word to create another word with a meaning and a category distinction, which may be distinct from that of its base. For example, verb to adjective, read, readable, verb to noun, write, writer, noun to adjective, girl, girlish, noun to verb, glory, glorify, adjective to noun, black, blackness, adjective to verb, modern, modernize, adjective to adverb, great, greatly, Inflectional affixes now. Inflectional affixes are those bound morphemes whose presence in the structure is mandated by the structure of a sentence. Tell me about the inflectional affix.
So yeah, the structure mandates, the structure of the sentence mandates the presence of inflectional affix. Inflection creates new forms of the same word with the addition of grammatical properties. The basic meaning of the newly formed word would be the same. English inflectional morphology includes the following. The first is nominal suffixes like plurals or possessives. Dog plus s becomes dogs, that's plurals, and possessive dog apostrophe s. It also includes adjectival suffix. For example, comparative and superlative. Dark plus darker. Dark plus est, darkest. And it also includes verbal suffix like present, third person singular, by plus s, buys.
Yeah, correct. By plus s, buys. Past, walk plus ed, walked. Progressive, read plus ing, reading. Now, the differences between inflectional and derivational morphemes. So, derivational morpheme can change part of speech or meaning. For example, meant, the suffix meant form nouns such as judgment from verbs such as judge. Inflectional affixes, on the other hand, they do not change the part of speech or meaning. For example, big and bigger are both adjectives. The second difference. So, derivational morpheme typically indicate the semantic relations within the word. For example, the morpheme full in painful has no particular connection with any other morpheme.
Yeah, correct. It has no particular connection with any other morpheme in the sentence beyond that word, painful. Whereas inflectional morphemes, they typically indicate syntactic or semantic relations between different words in a sentence. For example, the morpheme s in talks shows agreement with the subject of the verb. The third difference. So derivational morpheme typically occurs with only some members of the class of morphemes. For example, the suffix dumb occurs with just a few nouns such as bowl, boredom, king, kingdom. But inflectional morphemes typically occur with all the members of a class of morphemes. For example, the plural morpheme s occurs with almost all countable nouns in English. Tell me the next difference.
The next derivational morphemes typically occur before the inflectional suffixes. In healthier, the derivational suffix y comes before the inflectional suffix but inflectional morphemes typically occur at the margins of words. For example, the plural morpheme s always comes last in an English word as establishments, rectifying. The next difference, that derivational morphemes pile up. For example, disestablishmentary, and inflectional morphemes do not pile up. Only one inflectional affix can end a word. Now, portmanteau morphemes, the second type. So, portmanteau morphemes are those morphemes that carry more than one piece of meaning. Tell me about it.
Yeah, that's correct. The portmanteau morphemes carry more than one piece of meaning, but which cannot be broken down into separate morphemes. For example, s means singular, present, and third person, but these meanings cannot be separated. The third type of morpheme is empty morpheme. Empty morphemes are those which have structure or form but no meaning. In the word cranberry, although berry has meaning, cran does not have any meaning of its own. R in children is also an example of empty morpheme. Now, the next is zero morpheme. Tell me about zero morpheme.
So zero morphemes are the morphemes that are physically not present in the word yet fulfill the grammatical requirement of the language. For example, the word cut has the same form in both past and present tense. In the past tense, the null morpheme is added to the root, thus it has a function but no form. That's zero morpheme. Now the fifth type of morpheme is clitics. Clitics are elements which exhibit an affix-like phonological dependency on a neighboring word, but whose syntax is word-like. So the syntax of clitics is like word. They cannot be integrated into standard discourse without being bound to some other forms. Clitics often have grammatical rather than lexical meaning. They belong to closed classes like pronouns, prepositions, and conjunctions.
That's correct. And clitics are usually attached to the edges of words outside the derivational and inflectional affixes. For example, the contraction of the morpheme is as in what's going on. Clitics are of two types, proclitics and enclitics. Proclitic occurs at the beginning of a morpheme and enclitics occur at the end of a morpheme. Clitics are sometimes difficult to distinguish from inflectional affixes because of their syntactic relevance. Zwicky and Pullum in 1983 proposed the following criteria for distinguishing the affixes from clitics. Now tell me about the proposal made by Zwicky and Pullum to distinguish between clitics and affixes in the year 1983.
So clitics exhibit a low degree of selection with respect to their hosts, while affixes exhibit a high degree of selection with respect to their stems. The second difference is that arbitrary gap in the set of combinations are more characteristic of affixed words than clitic group. So affixed words have arbitrary gap, but clitic groups have no arbitrary gaps or less. The third difference is the morphophonological idiosyncrasies are more characteristic of the affixed words than clitic groups. So affixed words have the morphophonological idiosyncrasies, whereas that's not the case with clitics. The next difference is that semantic idiosyncrasies are more characteristics of affixed words than clitic groups.
Correct. The next difference is that syntactic rules can affect words but they cannot affect the clitic groups. Syntactic rules can affect words, not the clitics. The next difference is that clitics can attach to material already containing clitics, but affixes cannot attach to words which already have affixes. Clitics can attach to things which already contain a clitic. Now talking about the lexical versus grammatical morpheme. Lexical morphemes are those having meaning by themselves. A morpheme such as noun, verb, adjective, adverb that has a referent belongs to a class of lexical morphemes. Now tell me about the grammatical morphemes.
So lexical, those are lexical morphemes that have meaning by themselves. The grammatical morphemes specify a relationship between other morphemes. Prepositions, articles, conjunctions like of, the, but. These are all grammatical morphemes. However, the distinction is not all that well defined. According to this definition, lexical and grammatical morphemes are always free morphemes. Some linguists define lexical morphemes as group of morphemes when attached to a root would add lexical information to it. For example, the morpheme adds the semantics of the root word to which it is attached. Dance, dancer. Grammatical morphemes are those, when added to a root, would contribute to its functional properties. For example, addition of the morpheme s adds up the functional or grammatical property of the root to which it is attached.
Talking about the discontinuous morpheme now. So discontinuous morphemes are those morphemes interrupted by the insertion of another morphological unit. Circumfixes are examples of discontinuous morpheme. Now morph. Morph is the phonetic realization of a morpheme. Langdon defines it as a specific pronunciation associated with a specific meaning, such that the pronunciation cannot be broken down into meaningful parts whose meanings combine to form the meaning of the whole. For example, take the word no. There is no distinction between the morpheme and the morph, as there is only one meaning that is associated with the pronunciation. However, in most of the cases, the morphemes differ phonologically and semantically from the morphs derivable from it.
Yeah, correct. They do differ from the morphs derivable from it. For example, the morpheme you is realized as a number of morphs like you singular and you plural. Now, allomorph. Allomorphs are the group of morphs that are the realization of the same morpheme. That is, just as allophones are the variants of a phoneme, so allomorphs are the variants of a morpheme like id, da, and da. These are all allomorphs of the past tense morpheme: studied, fucked, kissed. So that's allomorph. Allomorphs are in complementary distribution. That is, they have same meaning and function, but they do not occur in the same environment.
Now words, lexemes and word forms. Talking about that. So Bloomfield defines words as the minimal free units. It is same as defining words as all units between two spaces in a written context. However, these definitions are too insufficient to explain the complicated concept word. The term word is often used in two different senses, as a physical unit and as a semantic unit or entity. These physical entities, the written or spoken forms of a word, are called word forms. In other words, word forms are the physical realization of lexemes. They include the inflected forms of a lexeme. For example, sit, sat, sitting are the different word forms of the word sit.
Lexeme is the term used to denote the usage of word to refer to the semantic entity. It is normally defined as the vocabulary items listed in a dictionary. A lexeme includes all inflected forms of a word. It is an abstraction and is indicated by small capitals. For example, sit in capitals, and sits, sat, sitting, sit. These are forms. Walk in capital, and then walks, walking, walked, walk. These are in small letters, or the derived forms of that.
Okay, now.
So yeah, let's talk about root. Tell me, what is root?
Roots are primary lexical unit of a word which carry the most significant aspects of semantic content. They cannot be reduced into smaller units. They are lexical morphemes, the base to which grammatical derivational morphemes are added to form a complex word. Most roots can themselves be used as uninflected base forms. Words may have multiple roots. Spencer defines root as that unit of form from which its paradigm of phonological words are deduced. It is what remains after shredding all the morphological realizations from a word. Some lexemes have more than one root. A root also qualifies as a stem.
Correct. All roots can be base, but not all bases are roots. For example, walk is the root word of the root form of walks, walking, walked, walker, and so on. Now, talking about stem. So, the stem is that part of the word that is in existence before any inflectional affix. It is a term that is reserved for inflection. For example, in the word books, the stem is book, which is also a root. It immediately precedes the inflectional morpheme s. The word friendship is the stem of the word friendships, but it is not the root. Bases can be called stems in inflectional morphology.
Now talking about base. A base is any form which enters into a word formation process that yields a more complex form. It means base is a unit to which affixes of any kind can be added. The affixes attached to a base may be inflectional affixes selected for syntactic reasons or derivational affixes which alter the meaning or the grammatical category of the base. A root like girl can be a base since it can have attached to affixes. It can be attached to affixes like s, girls, ish, girlish, and so on. The base of the word playfulness is playful, and it is the immediate form.
Yes, correct. It is the immediate form which enters into the word formation process. Now, some criteria that were mentioned by Eugene Nida on the identification of morphemes. So, the first principle for identification, the first forms which have a common semantic distinctiveness and an identical phonemic form in all their occurrences constitute a single morpheme. For example, is identified as a morpheme in the words worker, runner, player, and doer. The second principle of Nida, it says that forms which have common semantic distinctiveness but which differ in phonetic form may constitute a morpheme provided the distribution of formal differences is phonologically defined.
Correct. For example, sa, za, is in the words loots, houses, kids respectively constitute a morpheme. Their occurrences are phonologically conditioned. When the sibilant sounds like s and za precedes the plural morpheme, so sibilant sounds like sa and sa, when they precede the plural morpheme, it takes the form of is. Rule: sa changes to is in the environment where the consonant is sibilant. Yeah? And in the preceding sound, if the preceding sound is voiceless, the plural morpheme s remains as it is. So rule here would be sa changes to sa in the environment where the consonant is voiceless.
Correct. Rule here would be sa changes to sa in the environment where the consonant is voiceless or minus voiced. Now, if the preceding sound is voiced, then the plural morpheme sa changes to za. So rule here would be sa changes to za in the environment where the consonant is voiced or there's a vowel. Now, the third principle of Nida, it says that forms which have a common semantic distinctiveness but which differ in the phonetic form in such a way that their distribution cannot be phonologically defined, constitute a single morpheme if the forms are in complementary distribution. Suppletion is an example of this. Suppletion is an extreme form of allomorphy in which two completely different roots have the same underlying morpheme.
Yeah, correct. Suppletion is an example of this. Suppletion is an extreme form of allomorphy in which two completely different roots have the same underlying morpheme. This means in suppletion, the allomorphs of a morpheme are phonetically unrelated. For example, go, went, is, was. So you understand how it works, right? Bad, worse, worst. Now the fourth principle of NIDA. An overt formal difference in a structural series constitutes a morpheme if in any number of such series.
Wait, I'll tell you the fourth principle. An overt formal difference in a structural series constitutes a morpheme if in any number of such series the overt formal difference and a zero structural difference are the only significant features for distinguishing a minimal unit of phonetic semantic distinctiveness. For example, both books and sheep are plurals, but one has the plural marker s and the other has null morpheme as the plural marker. According to NIDA's principle 4, this s and null constitute the same morpheme. Now the fifth principle of NIDA. Homophonous forms are identifiable as the same or different morphemes based on the following conditions. Now tell me about that. Tell me more.
The fifth principle of NIDA says the homophonous forms are identifiable as the same or different morphemes based on the following conditions. The first, homophonous forms with distinctively different meanings constitute different morphemes. For example, pair as in P-A-I-R, pear as in P-A-R-E, and pear as in P-E-A-R, the fruit. These are all different morphemes. The second condition is that the homophonous forms with related meanings constitute a single morpheme if the meaning classes are parallel by distributional differences. For example, run in the expression they run and their run. So that was the fifth. Now tell me about the sixth.
Well, the sixth principle of NIDA for classification of morpheme says that a morpheme is isolable. A morpheme is isolable if it occurs under the following conditions. The first, it occurs in isolation. The second, if it occurs in multiple combinations, in at least one of which the unit with which it is combined occurs in isolation or in other combination. The third is that if in a single combination, provided the element with which it is combined occur in isolation or in other combinations with non-unique constituents. For example, morphemes like cran, rasp, etc., which occur only in single combination, that is cranberry, raspberry. So that was about the principles. Now tell me about morphophonemic process.
So the morphophonemic process, when a morpheme is attached to a word, it may alter the phonetic environment of other morphemes in that. This is called morphophonemic process. Given below are some major morphophonemic processes. The first, assimilation. Assimilation is the process in which one sound becomes more similar to a neighboring sound under the influence of that neighboring sound. Assimilatory changes are classified in terms of three dichotomies: total, partial, contact, distant, and regressive, progressive. Talking about the total partial assimilation. So a change is a total assimilation if a sound becomes identical to another by taking all its phonetic features. Now tell me the example of this total assimilation.
Well, the example, so kale, K, E, and then colon, and then this lateral approximant thing, la. So kale, which means ask or to ask, plus li, the third person imperative in Kannada, becomes kelli, right? So that's total assimilation. Now if the assimilating sound acquires some of its traits but does not become identical to it, then such changes are called partial assimilation. For example, dog plus s, the plural marker, becomes dogs. The voiceless sa becomes voiced in assimilation with the voiced ga. Now tell me about the progressive regressive assimilation.
So the forward spread of a feature in assimilation is termed as progressive assimilation. For example, nya, penya, or pen, maybe it's pen. The outward vertical line of na is extending, so I believe it's ra, retroflex na, right? Ped, women plus kal, plural marker, in Tamil becomes pengal, not penagal. Penagal, it becomes penagal. So the voiceless velar consonant ka changed to a voiced velar consonant ga under the influence of the preceding vowel retroflex, preceding voiced retroflex na.
That's correct about progressive assimilation. Now backward assimilation, backward spread of feature in assimilation is termed as regressive assimilation. In plus logical becomes illogical, so that's backward assimilation. Now talking about the contact distant assimilation. If the sound undergoing change and conditioning sound are immediately adjacent to each other, then it is called contact assimilation. For example, in plus possible becomes impossible. If they are not adjacent to each other, then it is called distant assimilation. For example, penkwe becomes quenkwe. Penkwe becomes quinkwe. Tell me about reciprocal assimilation.
So reciprocal assimilation, if there is a mutual influence between the two phonemes, it is reciprocal assimilation. For example, awan, he, and chatai, shirt, becomes awang yatai, his shirt in Tamil. So that's an example of reciprocal assimilation. Mutual influence between the two phonemes. Dissimilation. So it is a kind of change in which sounds become less similar to one another. That's dissimilation. Chimney becomes chimney. That's an example of dissimilation. Now about gemination. So gemination refers to the doubling of consonants. That is the change which produces a sequence of two identical consonants from a single starting consonant.
Correct. It produces a sequence of two identical consonants from a single starting consonant. For example, OSAA, OSA means he or she knows in Finnish, which changes to doubling of consonant. O double S double A, so that also means he or she knows. That's a kind of that's an example of gemination. Now talking about degemination. When a sequence of two identical consonants is reduced to a single occurrence, the change is often called degemination. For example, in Latin, peccatu, which means sin, changed to peccado, which means sin in Latin.
Now talking about lengthening. Lengthening refers to the change in which some sounds, usually vowels, are lengthened in some context. For example, balk, B-A-L-K, which means brother-in-law in Kekshi, changed to balk, that is B-A-L-K, which means brother-in-law in Kekshi. Now shortening, the change in which some sounds, usually vowels, are shortened to some context, such as word finally before consonant clusters and so on. So that's shortening. Now a blot or apophony. A blot is the alternation of sounds within a word that indicates grammatical information. For example, sing, sang, sung. So that's about a blot.
Now the word formation processes. The first, compounding. So compounding is a process of word formation that involves the combination of two complete already existing word forms into a single compound. Compounds, like other words, belong to a particular syntactic category. The category of the entire compound is determined by its head. Compound nouns act as single word syntactically. Endocentric and exocentric are terms used to describe semantically headed and semantically non-headed compounds respectively. Now about endocentric compounds. Tell me about the endocentric compounds.
So endocentric compounds. Consider AB as a compound. Consider AB as a compound of A and B. In endocentric compounds, AB is an instance of B. In such compounds, the final element serves as the head of the compound and other elements provide additional information. The head determines the basic syntactic or semantic category of the compound. The non-head stem in endocentric compounds specifies a subcategory of the reference denoted by the head. For example, colorblind, type of blindness; sky blue, a type of blue; blackbird, a kind of bird; chess table, a type of table, etc. Now tell me about exocentric compounds.
So exocentric compounds. In exocentric compounds, AB is neither A nor B, but a C somehow associated with A and B. This type of compound does not have an overt semantic head. For example, saber-tooth. Saber-tooth is neither a tooth nor a saber, but a tiger with teeth resembling saber. Big mouth. Big mouth is not a kind of mouth, but a person who causes trouble by speaking indiscreetly. Pickpocket. Pickpocket is not a kind of pocket, but a thief who steals from the pocket of others. Now about copulative compounds. Copulative compounds are also called coordinative or dwand compounds. In copulative compounds, AB is A and B. In these compounds, the two units share the same status.
Correct. And they are frequently written with hyphens. For example, producer, director; owner, builder; murder, suicide. Now talking about the headness of a compound. The syntactic and semantic head of a compound may not necessarily be the same. The syntactic head of a compound is defined as the morpheme that determines the category of the word as a whole. For example, in a word like speaker, is considered to be the head as it provides the syntactic category of the word. Main propagandists of this idea are Lieber 1983 and William 1981. they advocate for a rule which is called the right-hand head rule, which says that the head of a morphologically complex word is the right-hand member of that word.
However, that turned out to be a false hypothesis. Semantic head of a compound is that word of supreme importance to which other words are joined as subordinates, or it is the morpheme that contributes the central semantic content to the compound word. Now, clipping. Clipping or shortening is the word formation process which refers to the reduction of a word to one of its parts. Clipping is of four types. For example, gas from gasoline, tech from technology. So the first type is back clipping or apocoppation. In back clipping, the initial part of the word is retained and the final part is deleted. This is the most common type of compounding. For example, ad from advertisement, cable from cablegram, exam from examination, math from mathematics.
Another type of clipping is foreclipping. Foreclipping refers to a phenomena in which the initial part of a word is deleted and the final part is retained. For example, phone from telephone, varsity from university, gator from alligator. The third type of clipping is middle clipping, where middle part of the word is retained. For example, flu from influenza. The fourth type of clipping, complex clipping. Here, clipped forms are also used in compounds. Most often, one part of the original compound remains intact. For example, cablegram from cable telegram, op art from optical art, augment from organization man.
Next up is blending. Blending is a word formation process in which a new word is formed by combining parts of two other words. The meaning of a newly formed word will also be a combination of the meaning of the two words. For example, smog is derived from smoke and fog and means a combination of both. Most blends are formed by one of the following methods. The first, the beginning of one word is added to the end of the other. Brunch from breakfast and lunch. Breakfast and lunch. The second, the beginnings of two words are combined. Shopcom from shopping complex. Adblock from administrative block. The third, one complete word is combined with part of another word. Guesstimate from guess and estimate. Then we have back formation. Back formation.
Yeah, that's true. The third type is one complete word is combined with part of another word. For example, guesstimate from guess plus estimate. The other type is back formation. Back formation is a word formation process in which new words are formed by the removal of what looks like a typical affix in the language. The words like edit and televise in English are back formed from the nouns editor and television respectively. The next is coining. Coining is the invention of totally new words. Xerox, Vaseline, FB. Now, tell me about acronyms.
So acronyms are words created from initial letters of several words or word parts in a phrase or name. Acronyms and initialism are abbreviations. These words are pronounced in a way that is distinct from that of the full forms for which they stand, as the names of the letters, as in IBM, or as a word, as in laser. For example, radar, UNO, scuba. Now, the next is borrowing. New words also enter a language through borrowing from other languages. The borrowed words are called loan words. A loan word is a word taken directly into one language from another language with little or no translation. By contrast, a calque or loan translation is a related concept.
Yeah, true. By contrast, calque or loan translation is a related concept whereby it is the meaning or idiom that is borrowed rather than the lexical item itself. For example, piano and concerto are words borrowed from the Italian language. Now, the next is derivation. The most productive process of word formation in a language is the use of derivational morphemes. Derivation is the process of forming new words from already existing ones by the addition of affixes. The derived word may not be in the same category of the root and it will be semantically distinct from the root. For example, rearrange derived from arrange and establishment derived from establish.
Next word formation process is conversion. Conversion, also called zero derivation, is a kind of word formation in which a new word is created from an already existing word without any change in the form. In conversion, the category of the existing word will be converted to a new one, keeping the form constant. For example, the adjective clean is converted to the verb clean. The noun butter is converted to the verb butter. Next word formation process is incorporation. Incorporation is phenomena in which a word, usually a verb or preposition, is compounded with another element, typically a noun or pronoun or adverb. The most common type of incorporation is noun incorporation, where a nominal stem is fused with a verbal stem.
Yes, in noun incorporation, nominal stem is fused with verbal stem to yield a larger derived verbal stem. For example, breastfeed, babysit. Next word formation process is eponym. Eponym are words derived from proper names. For example, gargantuan, jumbo. Next word formation process is reduplication. Reduplication is the process of forming new words either by doubling an entire word or part of a word. Reduplication is different from repetition. Repetition is a term which is used to indicate sounds, concepts that are repeated in one form or the other to provide reinforcement and emotional emphasis.
Yes, full reduplication involves the exact repetition of a sound or a word, whereas partial reduplication involves consonant abort or vowel alternation. For example, jinn means ourselves and jin means we to us. Kagir means belt, kagirgir means to wear belt. Now, sandhi, internal versus external sandhi. The term sandhi literally means putting together or combining sounds. It denotes all the phonological processes that occur at morpheme and word boundaries when two words are combined together. Sandhi occurs prominently, particularly in the phonology of Indian languages. Sandhi is of two types, internal and external sandhi. Tell me about both types of sandhi.
Internal sandhi refers to the alternation of sounds within words at morpheme boundaries. For example, sin plus pati means changes to sympathy. External sandhi. External sandhi refers to the alternation of sounds found at the word boundaries. For example, tem plus bucks becomes tem bucks. The alveolar nasal changes to bilabial nasal. Most tonal languages have tone sandhi. in which the tones of words alter according to predetermined rules. Now, tell me about the syntagmatic versus paradigmatic relationship.
So syntagmatic paradigmatic distinction was introduced by Ferdinand de Saussure, and it was the Center for Structural Semiotic Analysis. Saussure reckoned the interrelationships of symbols within the language system, and he argued that these relationships could be classified into the syntagmatic and associative relations. These were the terms used by Saussure for paradigmatic relations, syntagmatic and associative. Roman Jacobson redefined this concept later and is widely employed in linguistics now. Syntagmatic relation denotes the relation between a word and other words in a sequence. It involves a process of combination.
That's correct. It involves a process of combination. This can be seen as a horizontal or sequential action, sequential relation between words. For example, syntagmatic relation is the relation between the word cut and other words I, am, and apple. In the sentence I cut an apple, there are syntagmatic and semantic rules that words in syntagmatic relation should meet. Paradigmatic relation, on the other hand, involves the selection among the possible alternatives. It is a vertical associative relation. It denotes the relation between a word and the possible words in that position. For example, the relation between the word cut and the other words like eat, pluck, buy.
Yes, the relation between the word cut and other words like eat, pluck, buy, etc. that can possibly take the position of cut in the sentence I cut an apple is paradigmatic relation. Paradigmatic relation is also known as vertical relation or choice relation. These two relations are often presented as axes, where the horizontal axis represents the syntagmatic and the vertical axis represents the paradigmatic relations. These relations are applicable at all levels of linguistics. In phonology, one can say that the phoneme k is in syntagmatic relation with the phonemes I and n, e and n in the word kin, and is in paradigmatic relation with the phonemes ta and pa in tin and pin.
Now talking about lexical morphology. The lexical morphology and phonology model was introduced by Paul Kiparsky and K.P. Mohanan. It is characterized by its treatment of language with a symbiotic relationship between morphological and phonological rules. The central principle of lexical morphology is that morphological component of the grammar is organized in a series of hierarchical strata. In lexical morphology, English affixes are classified into two broad classes on the basis of their phonological behavior. Affixes that do not result in any phonological variation on the base to which they are attached are called neutral affixes. For example, less, less.
And those affixes which cause an effect on the segmental and suprasegmental structure of the base to which they are attached are called non-neutral affix. For example, ik, e, phonetic examinee. The neutral, non-neutral distinction corresponds to the distinction between primary and secondary affixes and the distinction between weak boundary, that is between neutral suffix and base, and strong boundary between non-neutral suffix and base in the sound pattern of English. Primary affixes is the term for affixes behaving like the non-neutral affixes in SPE, and secondary affixes is the term for neutral affixes. Now, yeah, so that's about.
Not just that, adding to what you said, the basic principle of lexical morphological model is level ordering hypothesis. It is assumed that the affixes are added to the base at different strata or levels, and each stratum has associated with it a set of morphological rules that do the word building. Now talking about nominalization and lexicalist hypothesis. So Chomsky formulated the lexicalist hypothesis in his paper Remarks on Nominalization, published in the year 1970. The lexicalist hypothesis advocates that the derived nominals in a language are not derived by the transformation of an underlying constituent. Instead, they are present in the lexicon.
This means that both members of the pairs of words such as decide, decision, establish, establishment are represented in the lexicon rather than that there is a transformation converting one to the other. In Jackendorf's words, transformations do not perform derivational morphology. Before Chomsky's epoch-making work of 1970, nominalizations were considered as both deverbal and dissential. This was the root of Robert Lee's work, The Grammar of English Nominalizations, published in the year 1960. Chomsky argued against Lee's proposition that the derived nominals are derived transformationally from verbs.
The basic premise of what the lexicalist hypothesis is the independence of syntax and word structure. The guiding idea here is simply that the rules and principles involved in the construction of phrases, that is the syntax, and the rules and principles involved in the construction of words, that is the morphology, are disjoint. Now, oscillation. So the process of development of lexical items into auxiliaries is termed as oscillation.